let's get to our exciting conversation tonight. To moderate this, I won't say debate, this conversation, but maybe it'll be a debate. We'll find out. We have Professor John DiIulio.
They're going to be very disappointed.
The moderator will be debating each of the. No.
All right. Could I have your attention back over to this point? John DiIulio is the Frederick Fox Leadership Professor of Politics, Religion, and Civil Society at the University of Pennsylvania. Over the last quarter century, he's published many books and articles and won a whole host of major academic and teaching awards. I suspect he would like me to emphasize the following, though. Outside academic life, he's developed programs to mentor the children of prisoners, provide literacy training to low-income communities, reduce homicides in high-crime police districts, and support inner-city Catholic schools that serve low-income children. Sounds like an argument for religious freedom to me. During his academic leave in 2001-2002, he served as the first director of the White House Office of Faith-Based and Community Initiatives. John, we're delighted you're with us tonight to moderate this important conversation. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tom, and I want to welcome all of you to Religious Freedom, a barroom brawl. No. Religious freedom, a hot conversation. No, religious freedom, a conversation.
That's it.
Okay. And let me just, before introducing these two giants who need no introduction but are going to get one, let me first just underline what Tom said. I know that Dr. Lugo is here from the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life, my old friend, and it's very difficult to find fact-based analyses of faith-based issues anywhere. The Pew Forum is one place that does it, but Dr. Lugo, you've got competition. The Religious Freedom Project and what's going on here at the Berkley Center. I know I don't need to proselytize, as it were, to this group about the work of the Berkley Center, but if you haven't gone on that website or looked at these publications, they're capacious, they're balanced, they're thoughtful, and it's really a remarkable thing, Tom, that you and your colleagues have done. So would you just join me in giving a hand to the Berkley Center? Thank you. Well, it is my pleasure to introduce these two, as I say, these two giants who need no introduction but are going to get one. And first, Pastor Rick Warren, who is rightly and I think widely regarded as the single most important spiritual leader in America. Now, with the Pope stepping down, we may go global on that, but let's see how that plays out. He is the author, as all of you know, I'm sure, of many books, but among them, The Purpose-Driven Life, which is the best-selling book, hardcover book in American history. Some years ago, actually, at a Pew Forum event, I had the honor.
That?
Of course.
Wow.
You're a force of nature. I'm just hanging on here. He was there with me, and we were the opening act, as it were. And
Mike Cromarty.
Mike Cromarty was there,
Yeah.
and I said that they must have wanted to have a panel where the average book sales of the two guys was 10 million each. You're 20 million and my none. So now The Purpose-Driven Life is sold like 32 million.
40s.
I'm keeping pace. I'm up to almost next to none at this point. So I want you to be aware. I'm on your heels, Pastor. Okay.
All right.
With his wife, Kay Warren, in 1980, he founded Saddleback Church in California. It's not only a place that has weekly attendees over 20,000, but it's a place that has spawned a remarkable more than 300 different community-serving ministries, amazing ministry to the homeless, spawned all kinds of other incredible initiatives on adoption, been the really seedbed for programs that reach into correctional facilities and bring people back to lawful behavior, as well as in many cases bring people to God. Pastor Warren, however, is not just a California guy and a national figure. He's a global figure. The Purpose-Driven Network has trained more than 400,000 ministers and priests worldwide. It is just a remarkable story. As I'm sure many of you know, in 2004 and 2008, he had roles at the inaugurals. In 2008, he also moderated a discussion between then Senators Barack Obama and Senator John McCain. He's won so many awards. He has won so many plaudits, been on so many magazine covers. But I just want to conclude my relatively brief, because I can go on forever about Pastor Warren, who is a force of nature, by saying that the thing about Pastor Warren that really is so special to so many people, myself included, is to know that he is a pro-life and pro-poor person who practices what he preaches about the purpose-driven life, giving more than 90% of his income to charity, forging these ministries, and actually being a person who all that he does, amazing organizations that he spawned, finds the time somehow to be a pastor at the individual level. And I happen to know that personally through a friend who reached out to him some years ago, and he's a remarkable man. So Pastor Warren, welcome.
Thank you, guys.
And now to Professor Robert George, my colleague formerly at Princeton University till he had me run out of the place. He holds the most distinguished chair, really, at Princeton University, which is the McCormick Chair of Jurisprudence. He is the founder of the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions. And he is widely and rightly regarded as the single most influential Catholic lay intellectual in America. Now, whether the odds makers in Las Vegas have not yet posted his odds of becoming Pope. By 10 o'clock we'll know. He's a graduate of Swarthmore College as well as Harvard Law School. He also has a master's in theology from Harvard and a doctorate in philosophy of law from Oxford University. He has written more books and scores of articles, provocative, profound, writes them faster and better than one could even keep up with. But among the titles, In Defense of Natural Law, Making Men Moral, The Clash of Orthodoxies, and recently Embryo, A Defense of Human Life. But he is no Ivy League, ivory tower intellectual. He has been involved in so many issues and areas significant to religious life, civic life, and public policy. He served on the President's Council on Bioethics, the U.S. Civil Rights Commission, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, and was a judicial fellow of the U.S. Supreme Court, among others. He has won, as well, numerous awards, top awards, major awards, academic and public service, the Presidential Citizens Medal, the Bradley Prize for Intellectual and Civic Achievement, and many, many others. He is also an incredible teacher. He is one of the most revered, respected, and beloved teachers at Princeton University. His pedagogy transcends all the usual ideological and other categories, and even those who may disagree with him on occasion, respect and revere him. And it's even rumored that there are fat professors who are Democrats in Philadelphia who feel that way. So, and on that note, let me get us rolling here. We're here to talk about religious freedom, religious liberty. And just by way of getting us started, Pastor Warren, when you use the term religious freedom and religious liberty, what do you mean by it? And why do you think it's so important? Why are you so impassioned about it?
Well, first, I love these two guys. They are brilliant, brilliant men, and I'm sure glad they're on our side. That's all I can say. They're really, truly giant intellectual men. Okay, let's take the phrase religious liberty and just define the words first. First, what is religion? Okay, what's religion? Religion is far more than worship. But that's what people want to make it today. And if you define freedom of religion as simply freedom of worship, then all my freedom stops the moment I walk out of mass, service, synagogue, or whatever. So religion involves every single area of my life. How I make my decisions, how I spend my money, how I use my time, how I raise my children, how I educate my kids, how I build my business. If I am truly a religious person, my faith affects every area. I can't compartmentalize it as simply worship. If we allow, and there are forces right now that want to, in fact, I've seen the State Department memos, stop talking about freedom of religion and start talking about freedom of worship, then you have a real problem. The problem is the Constitution doesn't guarantee freedom of worship. It guarantees freedom of religion. So what is religion? It is something that involves everything in my life. And so I would say freedom of religion is the freedom to practice, not just believe, the freedom to practice my faith and values and convert. That's an important part of religious freedom. I have been in probably 164 countries, I think, in the last 10 years. I've been in a number of countries that claim to have religious liberty. What they mean is, we don't care if you practice your faith as long as you do it behind closed doors. If you're a Jew, you can worship Yeshua or Jehovah behind closed doors. If you're a Christian, you can worship Jesus behind closed doors, but you cannot convert or convert anybody else. That's not, if that were true, then Saudi Arabia has freedom of religion, because you can do stuff in secret there. It's not freedom of belief, it's freedom to practice. And that is a fundamental thing, and it affects everything that I do. The Bible says twice in Scripture, Jesus went to every village preaching, teaching, and healing. Preaching would be evangelization. Teaching would be education. Healing would be health care. 1/3 of Jesus' ministry was health care. God doesn't just care about our souls. He cares about our minds and our bodies. And Jesus as our Savior is not just our Savior, He's our teacher and He's our healer. And it is not by accident that every country in the world, the first school and the first hospital were started by Christian missionaries, because we have a preaching, teaching, healing faith. And so we can't just say, I mean, I was arguing with the administration once and said, the audacity of you telling us how to do health care. The church has been doing health care 2,000 years longer than any government. We invented the hospital. Do you know that? Christians invented the hospital. The church invented the hospital. That wasn't a government decision. The church invented the hospital. And so when I say religion, it involves preaching, teaching, and healing. And of course, Jesus said true religion, or James says true religion cares for the widow and orphan. So that's another factor. Charity is part of my religion. So don't say that religious liberty only applies to my worship. It also applies to my charity. It also applies to the way I educate, and it also applies to the way that I help the sick.
Professor George, same question. You teach at that New Light Scott Presbyterian institution known as Princeton University, so I know you must feel somewhat oppressed by the Presbyterians there. But putting that aside, seriousness, and is there any difference, if you could accent, is there any difference between you and Pastor Warren, just in terms of, do Catholics approach this different? Does it have a different accent, even perhaps, when Catholics talk about religious liberty and freedom?
Well, first, John, let me say just what a pleasure it is to be back at Georgetown, and I want to second all the fine things that have been said about Tom Farr and his colleagues here at the Berkley Center. The work they're doing is fabulous. I have a little special connection with the center because my daughter Rachel worked here for half a year. She's now a graduate student in Middle Eastern Studies at Harvard, and that interest of hers was nurtured by the folks here at the Berkley Center. And what an honor it is to be with you two guys, you two friends and heroes. Pastor Rick is exactly what John said, a force of nature and a tremendous force for good. Not all forces of nature are forces for good. Pastor Rick is a force for good. Now, I almost didn't recognize him without the Hawaiian shirt. It's the same guy. As soon as I heard him preaching there, I said, that's him. That's
I'm incognito, Rick.
And John, my goodness, John, when I got the stunning news yesterday morning, woke up, turned on the radio, heard the news, I thought, gee, well, John might not be able to make it tomorrow evening. He might have a job interview in Rome going on. We miss John at Princeton. John was my colleague for 13 years. They were 13 wonderful years, and we just miss him terribly, but he is doing literally the Lord's own work at the University of Pennsylvania. Not only at the university, although that's very important, but as Tom emphasized, in the streets with at-risk young people in particular. John, too, as I have very often said, is a force of nature and a force for good. Religious liberty. I've been thinking about the question of religious liberty and writing about it for many, many years. But my first time to sit down and think formally about what it is, formally in the academic sense, was when I was invited by Tom and our dear friends here to give a lecture before the conversation with Sheikh Hamza on religious liberty. I entitled my lecture, Religious Liberty and the Human Good. And there I made the argument, which I will not rehearse for you because it would be another 45 minutes. I made the argument that the freedom of religion is not merely an abstract liberty.
Yeah.
So much of our conversation about freedom has been formed in a certain post-Enlightenment context that we regard our rights, including our first freedom, religious freedom, as if they were hovering in the atmosphere. They were abstract rights, not connected to our concrete good as human beings, as these unities of body, mind, and spirit, as Pastor Rick reminds us, human persons. So I thought, well, look, if religious liberty really is a right, indeed a fundamental right, it must be the implication, must be a protection of a human good. Now, what good? Well, my friend Tim Shaw has laid it out brilliantly in the little book that he did in relation to that conference and is published by the Berkley Center. That good is the good of religion itself. Now, what does that mean? Well, in its fullest and most robust sense, religion, it seems to me, is nothing other than our, man's, human beings, right relationship with God, or the gods, or the divine. And in all cultures, we find man striving for that. Even in those that are not theistic, Buddhist cultures, at least some Buddhist cultures are not theistic, we still find that striving for a harmony, a friendship with the divine, getting things right, getting into line, getting into harmony. Now, why do we strive like that? It's because of the way we're made. It's because of the nature of the human being. Our most immediate experience as conscious and intentional actors is our experience of our own freedom. We experience ourselves as creatures who cause things that we are not caused to cause. We experience what philosophers call free will. Now, if that experience is other than illusory, and of course a lot of secularists and anti-religious people, my old pal Richard Dawkins from my common room in Oxford, want to explain that away, but they know they have to explain it away. They know they can't defeat religion unless they can persuade themselves and us that that experience of being creatures who transcend the order of causality is merely an illusion. But it's not. Any effort to explain it away so that we can reduce human behavior to material and efficient causes will ultimately be self-defeating. It will not be able to explain the motivation or the enterprise of trying to get at the truth of the matter as to whether, in fact, humans are rational and free. And if we're free, we're rational, and if we're rational, we're free. Those are reciprocal. If we're free, we act for reasons. If we're capable of acting for reasons that are more than merely instrumental to our desires, then we are free actors. It's that experience, it seems to me, of ourselves as, dare I say it, spiritual creatures, self-transcending creatures, creatures transcending the order of causality, that is responsible for the ubiquity of religion. It's responsible for the quest for harmony with the more than merely human sources of meaning and value, if there be such. And that good of the human person, that fulfillment, which begins with the quest, which begins with opening the questions, asking the questions, and which culminates in the ideal, which is unattainable to us fallen creatures, but culminates in the ideal which we can project of a full and perfect unity with God, with the divine, getting religion right. That's the most robust form. But it begins and is exemplified in the very process of asking those questions. So if that quest is part of our good, is it part of our flourishing, an aspect of our integral well-being as human beings, then protecting that is critically important. And there's the ground of our commitment to religious liberty, not as some abstraction floating around there in the atmosphere, but as a real protection of a real good of body, mind, and spirit, flesh and blood, human beings. So I would just sort of lay that foundation for Rick's view, which I entirely agree with and don't see any Protestant-Catholic divide there, and would add then, put a little on the foundation of where Rick is. Now just let me add something on top of it, one more element. Religious freedom includes all that Rick said, plus the right to take one's religiously informed moral convictions into the public square.
Absolutely.
And to vie on terms of fairness and equality with one's fellow citizens for their allegiance when it comes to the making of public policy. The attempt to drive religion into the purely private sphere, out of the public square, to design a system in which public reasons, to use John Rawls' famous phrase, are drawn so narrowly, the concept of public reason is drawn so narrowly as to exclude the religious witness, is simply to cut the heart out of the right to religious freedom, which the proponents of the narrow public reasons view say is the last thing they want to do. They depict themselves as great respecters of, and promoters of, and defenders of religious liberty. But you can't do a halfway job here. If you're a defender of religious liberty, it must be in the robust sense, not only in terms of proselytization, advocacy, the right to convert, the right to persuade one's neighbors, which is something that our church, John and my church, got around to late. Our Baptist friends got there much earlier than we did. Now, when we got there good and proper. I'd suggest even to our Protestant friends, there's something to be learned by reading the magnificent document of the Second Vatican Council, Dignitatis Humanae, which lays this out. But the point is, it's the whole thing, or else you're just, whistling in the wind.
Right.
And the whole thing means being able to take those religiously inspired convictions into the public square and vie on terms of equality. It doesn't mean you get some advantage over your unbelieving fellow citizens. Terms of equality. What I think is intolerable is for, I hope I'm not getting too partisan here, secular liberals to declare that their view is not a comprehensive view.
I mean, I don't know. That's okay. That's right.
Their view is not a comprehensive view. It's a neutral view. And that neutral view is just providing a fair playing field for Jews and Christians and Muslims to compete. And I often say to my students, that's like the pitcher for the other team suddenly declaring himself to be umpire.
Right.
And suddenly, every pitch is a strike. 27 batters up, 27 batters down, 3 pitches per batter. How did that happen? So let's not fall for that trick.
Pastor Warren, what do you have to say? Add or subtract? So try to subtract. No, go ahead.
Well, what I absolutely agree with Robbie on, and what people try to play it off as, is belief versus rationality. That's nonsense. Absolute nonsense. The truth is, everything done in the public square is done by believers, because everybody believes something. It is psychologically impossible to believe nothing. You cannot believe nothing. To live, you have to believe something. An atheist believes something. A secularist believes something. So the issue is not between rationality and belief and faith. The issue is between your worldview and my worldview. And so don't, as Robbie just says, don't pretend you're the umpire, that the secular is the neutral view. Everybody has a worldview. Now, following up on what Robbie just said, the freedom of religion comes out of, and I talked a little bit about this earlier, I think there are 3 or 4 sources of the freedom of religion. First is the nature of man, which he just pointed out. It is human beings are made in the image of God, which are given the freedom to choose. That is a free will, freedom of choice. And God gives me the freedom to accept or reject him. And if God gives me the freedom to accept or reject him, to obey or disobey him, then I've got to give that freedom to everybody else. I believe in conversion. I do not believe in coercion. They're 2 different things. And so the nature of man is one of the sources of freedom of religion. That's why the founders and the framers called it an inalienable right. The state doesn't give this right. It is an inalienable right, and it is endowed by our Creator. Okay. So there's the nature of man, and then there is the nature of God, and the nature of faith, and the nature of salvation. Faith cannot be forced. If you force it, it isn't faith. I have to choose to faith. God wants us to choose to love Him. So there's the nature of faith. It requires freedom of religion. Otherwise, it's not true faith. But then, of course, as Americans, we have the first freedom. It is not by accident that it is the first phrase of the first sentence, of the first paragraph of the First Amendment. It is the first freedom. It is the founding freedom. It is the freedom on which everything else is formed in America. It's why the Pilgrims came to America. We have two sets of founding fathers, the Pilgrims' fathers and the Puritan, and the political fathers, and both of them were absolutely committed to religious freedom. And so they did this because if you don't have religious freedom, none of the other freedoms matter. It is the one in which every other freedom, for instance, if I don't have the freedom to believe whatever I want to believe, freedom of speech is irrelevant. If I don't have the freedom to believe whatever I want to believe, freedom of the press is irrelevant. If I don't have the freedom to believe whatever I want to believe, freedom of assembly is irrelevant. It's why the first freedom is mentioned first. Freedom of religion is before the freedom, right to bear arms. It's before all those things that I just mentioned. And so what people have done today is they have misused the term separation of church and state. Now, Jefferson was by no means an Orthodox Christian, but he certainly did understand separation of freedom of church and state, and he actually didn't even invent that term. Roger Williams said it first in Rhode Island, and Jefferson co-opted it and used it in the famous letter to the Danbury Baptist, in which he talked about that. What's interesting is that Jefferson wrote the letter to the Danbury Baptist talking about the freedom of separation of church and state on a Friday. The following Sunday, Jefferson went to church at the largest church in D.C., which was meeting in the Capitol, and went there for the next 7 years. So his obviously idea of separation of church and state is not what a lot of people want to mean to me, because wait a minute, you're telling me we had a church in the Capitol building? Yes, for 7 years. In the Capitol building for 7 years. And Jefferson writes about separation of church and state and then sees no conflict going on Sunday to worship being in a government building. What a lot of people don't know is that Jefferson wrote a second famous letter. And it is the letter not to the Danbury Baptist, but it is a letter to the African Episcopals of Connecticut. And in that letter, he writes, the government has no place in matters of conscience and religion and these kinds. I know because I own that letter. I own it. If I were to sell it today, it'd be worth at least $1 million. It's in Jefferson's handwriting. And I care so much about religious liberty, I wanted to take it off the market. Amen. So now, if you want to buy it for $2 million, I'll donate it to Peace. I'll be glad to give it to you, and you'll be helping the Peace Plan. But, yeah, every man has a price. But that understanding is so way off base.
Well, let me take you both now. I mean, I think you've established pretty well that religious liberty is essential to the human person, and pretty well that there are issues and controversies surrounding it. I want to go to that, it's been mentioned several times, but to that Pew study, that Pew survey, which showed that 75% of the world's people live under severe or to moderate restrictions on their religious liberty. And what I want to ask you, starting with Pastor Warren, because you've done such incredible work literally in every country in the world your ministry has reached, including ones that aren't recognized by the UN, I guess.
That's right, 2 that aren't in the UN.
And, you know, you've done such incredible work in Rwanda, and so you've been there. It's not an abstraction for you. The question is, why do you think these restrictions why is there this rising tide of restrictions on religious liberty abroad? And do you think that U.S. foreign policy, that U.S. policy could do a better job at rolling back some of those restrictions and expanding the universe of religious freedom abroad?
Yes, yes, and yes. In the first place, it would be a fatal mistake if either party lets the other party co-opt religious liberty, in my opinion. This is an American issue. And regardless of whether you tend to be a liberal or conservative, you ought to care about the First Amendment. Because, and to let one party or the other have it, to me, would be dumb of that party to do that. It's interesting. I have been in a lot of countries because we do this thing called the Peace Plan, PEACE, which stands for Promote Reconciliation, Equip Servant Leaders, Assist the Poor, Care for the Sick, and Educate the Next Generation. And I read the Great Commission where Jesus said, go to every nation. So we said, has any church ever done that? Gone to every nation? Why don't we be the first church in 2,000 years of Christian history to literally go to every nation? Well, I didn't know how many nations there were. I had to look it up. There are 196 nations in the world. There are 194 in the UN. The only two nations not in the UN are Kosovo and Taiwan. So we said by the end of 2010, Saddleback will be working in every nation. And on November 18, 2010, we went to nation 196. Which is St. Kitts, a little island in the Caribbean, only 35,000 people. They said, we're not going to leave out Nation 196. I have sent over 17,000 of my members to promote reconciliation, equip the poor, assist the poor, care for the sick, educate the next generation. Interesting, the attitude of many nations toward America has dramatically shifted in the last decade. And part of it is classic liberalism says, when we're going to go overseas, classic liberalism says, we don't want to impose Western culture on your culture. That's classic liberalism. We're going to let that culture be itself. We're going to respect its culture, and we're not going to impose our Western values on that. Today's liberalism does the exact opposite. In every country of the world, they're saying, you want our money, you got to have our view on abortion, you got to have our view on homosexuality, you got to have they have a laundry list of issues. And I have I can't tell you how many countries I've been in, meeting with prime ministers and presidents who say, America, no thank you for your money. If your money you're telling us you're going to set our moral agenda. It's the exact reversal of what it used to be. So there's a real pushback right now on that.
Okay. Professor George, you are a member, right, of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom.
That's what you said.
Well, if you're not, we'll reveal it here
I was
now.
just taking on faith from you.
Taking faith from you, okay. What's your view? I mean, Pastor Warren suggests that U.S. policy has become somewhat adverse to, religious freedom abroad. What's your view of it? You're up close and personal.
We have here a great general in the struggle for religious liberty across the world, like Pastor Rick, and that's Jackie Wolcott, who's the Ambassador Wolcott is the executive director of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom.
Where is the pastor?
Who's charged?
Jackie.
There's Jackie, yeah. And so I work with Jackie every day.
Wow.
And our charge as a commission, and this was the hard work of a lot of religious people, different faiths, by the way, Protestants, Catholic, Jewish, Christian, you name it, to get into place a federal commission whose purpose would be to ensure that religious liberty was given a high place in the formation of U.S. foreign policy, and to be Jackie, I'm going to talk out of school, to be a thorn in the side of the State Department, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, who will too often, human nature being what it is, you Protestants know all about that.
Wait, let me stop right here. I'm not a Protestant. I stopped protesting the Catholic Church years ago. They're my best friends. I'm an evangelical.
See, John, you were right. He's campaigning for Pope. I didn't know.
There you go.
But human nature being what it is, good guys, when they're in positions of power, are going to be tempted to bargain away or to soft pedal or to lay aside the religious liberty issues in return for security, guarantees, economic and trade advantages and so forth. My friend Nina Shea's there. She's been working on with this as well for years and years and years. And she struggled to, former member of the commission, struggled to get this commission created. And we are a thorn in the side. And so we get a lot of criticism. And they try to depict us as partisan, although we're as multi-partisan, I think, as you could possibly be if you look at the makeup of our commission. But our commission is united across those partisan and ideological lines because we're, like Pastor Rick, we all believe in the First Amendment. We all believe in religious freedom. We believe that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, including religious liberty, number one, and the pursuit of happiness. So that's what we're doing. And you know, the State Department probably would be happier if we were there. You know, they have to be polite to us and so forth. But you know, our whole point is to be a burr in the saddle. Now, Pastor Rick has raised a very serious issue, and there's not nearly enough discussion of this in the American public square, mainly because American people don't know about it. And that is the pushing of an ideological agenda that comes out of the sexual revolution, let's face it. That is a Western secular liberal ideology. It's worked its way into elements of it are in all churches as well. It's got a religious version of it as well. But it's basically a, you know, Margaret Sanger, Alfred Kinsey, Hugh Hefner philosophy that is driven in U.S. foreign policy and used both, and carrots and sticks are both used to get other cultures to compromise on their religious beliefs in return for you get, you know, U.S. aid or U.S. Good graces or whatever it is. And this is a very serious issue because we should be both promoting religious freedom abroad, which our commission does. So, for example, there are some countries, Muslim countries, some, not all, but some Muslim countries, and some non-Muslim countries, where there is sometimes even formal legal punishments for conversion.
Yeah, sure.
And even where there aren't, tremendous pressure on people against conversion. And sometimes governments standing by and allowing retaliation with impunity against people who do convert. So that's one thing. But at the same time as we're promoting that, we're quarreling with our own government to try to say, look, you got to respect the religious views of cultures that do not want plane loads of condoms dropped. They want penicillin. And we're leaving them without penicillin and dropping plane loads of condoms because that fits the ideology of you know, the powers that be. So that, I think, has got to be reversed and turned around.
So let me ask you, and ladies and gentlemen, think up questions, because I'm going to ask a couple more questions, take you from international back here to the U.S., and maybe we'll open up for some questions. But let me ask you, look ahead, in particular to, for example, China, which obviously is a place that is undergoing massive transformations of all sorts. Some say liberalizing, some say not. Some believe that it will be the economic colossus by the mid-21st century. Others doubt that. But when you look at a particular country like China, and you consider the quest, the concern about religious liberty that you've each expressed, what do you see the future holding? Do you see this crisis, this rising tide of restrictions, this rollback of religious liberty getting worse over the next several decades and in places like China? Or do you think that somehow, some way, things are going to happen, and what might those things be to make things better?
Specifically China, a number of years ago I had a couple in my church, Denny and Betsy Cohen. He was a business leader and she was an attorney, and I sent them to China to teach business and law in Peking University. Peking University is the only thing in Beijing still called Peking. It is the Harvard of China. 50,000 students. Every communist leader goes to Peking University. If you're going to be in the system, you go to Peking University. And they actually they're the only school in China that has a center for the study of Christianity. None of them are Christians, but they're studying, you know, they have a Calvin scholar and a Catholic scholar, and so they invited me to come and speak, and actually, I never told the government this, but about 15 years ago, I invited the leaders of China to Saddleback Church, and they came. I didn't tell the government, I didn't tell my church, and I certainly didn't tell the media. And 18 of them came to Saddleback that we had from our contacts, and they said, "You want to come to visit a large church?" I said, "Sure." So I had them for a barbecue in my backyard, and I cooked them barbecued, you know, ribs and stuff like that. And the guy who was actually in charge of the religious affairs department was one of the guys, one of the Politburo guys, and he's actually in charge of the persecution. And he came, and after the service was over, I wasn't even speaking. My youth pastor was teaching on something like Christian parenting, and I said, "What did you think of the sermon?" He goes, "I actually got something out of that." He goes, "I'm a parent. I got 2 kids." He said, "If that's your brand of Christianity, you're welcome in China." And they sent me a letter, basically gave me carte blanche. I've had 2 state dinners in People's Hall with the government of China. I have debated them on this very issue of religious freedom. And one of them got pretty heated where I was talking to these guys in People's Hall, and I said, "You know what your problem is, you guys? You want the economic success without the moral and ethical underpinnings of Christianity or Judeo-Christian movement." And I said, "You want freedom, free markets, but you don't want freedom of information, freedom of religion, and freedom of speech." And that's like cutting the roots off the flower, as we say. You know, the flower will bloom for a while, but then it has no roots, so it's going to die. And I said, capitalism only works if there's a moral basis underneath it. By itself, it can just lead to greed. It is Christianity that says, hey, you got to treat your workers well. You got to pay them a good salary. You got to be kind to people. You got to not use slave labor and all these other things. I said, if you just take capitalism and put it on without the moral basis that we have had in America, you're going to get the same thing Russia did. You just train one set of thugs for another, and you get oligarchs instead of the Politburo. And so I said, you have to allow freedom of religion. What they actually fear more than freedom of religion is they fear Western religious entanglement, whether it is from the churches in America or from the Vatican or some other place. They have actually feared that because they've actually seen that Christians make good workers. And what we've found is we have lots of Christian business leaders who own factories in China. You can pretty much do anything you want to in that factory as long as you're producing. And I know guys who have 80,000 people in a factory, and they have a church on every single floor. Wow. And they allow, and when people get their break, if you want to go to church, you can go break. The government thinks nothing of that, as long as you're producing the widget, okay, as long as you're producing the map. So it's not so much freedom of religion as it is they're afraid of that. In their mind, Christianity still represents the West. And it's Western connection.
Fascinating. Professor George, same question, and also, you know, really looking ahead. Do you think it's going to be better or worse a few decades out, and why?
Well, first, you know, let me say that I again agree completely with Pastor Rick, and I would just add.
Oh, I agree with you.
I just
this is. I'm going to have to do something really dramatic in a moment to shake this up.
But what I would add this time to what Rick said is that. You know, this lesson about the need for a moral foundation for our economic system to flourish is one we in the United States have to relearn as well. It's not just the Chinese need to learn it. We need to learn that. We're paying a heavy price already for it. And in one dimension, we're seeing it in terms of the Wall Street sorts of scandals, the crony capitalism, the plutocracy. On the other side, we're seeing it in terms of how difficult it is in some places to even get economic renewal going because the breakdown of the family, the failure of family formation, family disintegration has brought with it what it always brings with it in its train, you know, the social pathologies that lead to the inability to do business, to have workers who show up to work on time, not drunk or on drugs, don't embezzle and so forth, which the business firms can't produce people they need who don't do those things.
Yeah.
Only the family can. So that moral foundation is really something we need to be pressing here in the United States as well. Now, Nina is a great expert on China, and I'm going to ask her actually to correct me if I'm wrong about this. But my sense on China is that the fear of religion there is not so much ideological. It's not the old Marxism, as it is the fear of alternative authority structures. Yeah. It's a fear of all of the institutions of civil society, but especially religion, because religion is very dangerous to totalitarian regimes. Unless you can really get hold of it and control it, having alternative authority structures. Look, they saw what happened in Poland, right? So they're going to let religion do its work, the good stuff, that from their point of view, the good stuff Pastor Rick's talking about, but they want control. They don't want there to be the Catholic Church you and I know and love, or all three of us know and love. Right. They want there to be the domesticated, tamed, under the control of the state Catholic Church, which is not really an authority, a separate authority structure that they've got control of. Now, I'd contrast that with issues in some other parts of the world where theologically motivated violations of religious liberty are the great problem, where people just don't like the competing religion or don't like people who are of that religion or want to stamp it out. And this is not just religious people against other religious people or religious people against secular people. In some places, it's secular people against religious people. Tom, I think, mentioned, if I heard him correctly, the growing problem of in Europe, secular hostility against religion. Just a couple of months ago, I had the occasion to write a little piece criticizing the decision of a German court to essentially prohibit religious circumcision of male infant children. The particular case that the court in, I think it was Cologne, was involved in involved a Muslim family, but of course this is potentially fatal to the practice of the Jewish faith. This is not optional. My friend Rabbi, former student Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik, tells me that the circumcising of male infant children is one of those things that is so important, goes to the very heart of the covenant, the very beginning of the covenant, that you've got to break the law. If it's if you're not allowed to do it by law, you've actually got to break the law, practice civil disobedience. And that means that if you're in a community where that is, if you're Jewish and in a community and serious about your faith, in a community where that is prohibited, that community will become Judenrein. What Hitler tried to accomplish by his sinister and horrible means, Jew-free, because they cannot practice the core covenant element of the faith. Well, I wrote this little piece criticizing it. I actually thought that I wouldn't get a lot of pushback because it seemed to me so outrageous to ban the circumcision of male children for religious reasons. I thought this is something that there will be unanimity. I wasn't expecting the hate mail that I usually get when I publish something on pro-life or marriage or something like that. You too? Yeah, but I was deluged with hate mail from people both here in the United States and in Europe who thought that it was sinister of me to defend the right of our Jewish brothers and sisters to circumcise their children. From their point of view, again, a liberal secular point of view, although not all secular liberals hold this, but I learned that there are plenty who do, claiming that this was child abuse, you were licensing child abuse, you're a monster for licensing child abuse. It was really an astonishingly hostile
you can abort
reaction.
them, but you can't circumcise them.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
I'm going to just take us domestic for a moment.
Let me say one other
Pastor,
thing
go ahead.
on what Robbie said. I want to go back.
Proceed.
Very important. He talked about the so much of it really is based on the view of sexuality and the promiscuousness that came out of the 60s. Most of the Bible people agree with. I could stand up and say, the Bible says, take care of the poor. Everybody would say, yeah. I said, care for orphans. Everybody would say yes. Always tell the truth. Everybody says yes. Help people who are sick. Everybody. So much of the Bible people would agree with. But when you come down to challenge my narcissism, now you got a problem. And I did a message last August. I called, and I then sent it to about, 20,000 pastors to use, on the three sanctities: the sanctity of life, and the sanctity of sex, and the sanctity of marriage. Because these are the three sticking points in our society. What we have done is we have reversed the Declaration of Independence. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness has been reversed. We have now put the pursuit of happiness first, and life and liberty are secondary issues. Because what matters most is the pursuit of happiness. I think there's a legitimate order to life comes first, liberty comes second, and then the pursuit of happiness comes third. But in our society, in the hedonistic society we have, the pursuit of happiness trumps everything else.
Can I add I think that's absolutely right. Let me add a point to it. And this goes to the concept of conscience, which is very integral to the idea of religious freedom. It's a very interesting question about the relationship of religious freedom and the freedom of conscience, both at the philosophical level and in terms of our own constitutional history. I think in any hedonistic society that has a concept of freedom of conscience, the freedom of conscience gets reduced to the idea of conscience as the permissions department. And what gets lost is the historic and correct idea of conscience, not as the permissions department that licenses me to act on my desires, whatever they happen to be, but rather the idea of conscience as what Cardinal John Henry Newman called a stern monitor. Newman made the point that conscience has rights because conscience has duties. To respect conscience is not to say people should be able to do whatever they want. It's not this kind of crazy libertarianism. It's rather that it's a serious business. There may be occasions when it's necessary for the public good, but it's a serious business. There's a presumption against interfering with conscience, because to interfere with conscience is to require somebody to do something that they feel obligated as a matter of morality and perhaps as a matter of God's own law to do, or to not fulfill some obligation that they feel it's necessary to do. Now, as I say, there are limits to that freedom of conscience. We're not going to let Neo-Aztecs engage in human sacrifice, and we're not, and we're right to not let that happen. But over a very broad range, and certainly presumptively, we protect conscience and should protect conscience so that people can fulfill their duties as they best understand them. So we need to correct this mistaken idea of conscience that comes out of the kind of me generation liberalism, that I'm entitled to do whatever I want unless my conscience tells me that I'm not allowed to do it. And you know what? I've got a pretty relaxed conscience, and it isn't in the business of telling me much about what I shouldn't do.
Yeah, Pol Pot followed his conscience.
Yeah, exactly.
So did a lot of other great genociders of the 20th century.
So let me take us domestic for a minute, and then I hope to elicit some questions, because I could see the fire and fury in your eyes, even with under these lights. The question really is about whether we can, on the domestic front, the U.S. front, debate religious liberty, sue each other, which I think is great. I mean, no, I do. I used to say, when I was in the White House, I used to say, sue me, sue me, because that's a better way to resolve religious conflict than a lot of other ways that have been practiced throughout history. I mean, it's an arena for controlled aggression, not unlike certain sports. That doesn't bother me much. But the question of whether we can kind of have our domestic religious liberty, religious freedom fights, walk and chew gum, disagree without being disagreeable. And let me give you a context. So I think context here matters a lot. When you talk about international religious liberty and you talk about what Pastor Warren, for example, has done in Rwanda, people are going to hear those issues differently. I mean, once you have those facts about the remarkable work you've done there and the difference that it's made in people's lives, people are going to bend a little on each side, frankly. And so in the United States, here, and maybe I'll get you not to disagree with each other, but maybe you can attack me now, okay?
Okay.
So, a very kind word for the Obama administration.
Consider yourself attacked.
Okay, thank you. I didn't want to pull this out. I knew this was a last resort, but there's a wonderful...
You'll do anything to get a spark.
There you go. There's a wonderful story to be told that really hasn't been told about while all the debates over religious hiring rights and all the debates over the HHS mandate, which I hope you'll each speak to as well in a moment, but have been going on, they have actually done through their faith-based centers some amazing work. For example, at the United States Department of Agriculture, a wonderful guy named Max Finberg, who was the chief of staff to Representative Tony Hall, who was a pro-life Democrat and so forth, and a wonderful, has made a life's work of anti-hunger. Is that right?
I've had three. I had Peter Kreeft. I've had three Catholics. Peter Kreeft preached at Saddleback, Tony Hall's preached at Saddleback, and Jim Toohey has preached at Saddleback.
Wow.
All three of those guys.
Wow, that's a
next.
triple play. That's a triple play.
You're next, buddy.
Well, you'll be down to 3,000 congregants by the time I get done. But they've done Max Finberg there, who's the head of the Faith Center there, and they've institutionalized, has done a remarkable job of working with community-serving religious organizations and expanding the number of meals that are being served by Catholic organizations, other religious organizations, doubling the number of meals going to children in the summer. They've done it quietly. They've done it below the radar screen. I've written and talked about that recently, and I can give you other stories. Now, this has gone on, this good work, this common good work, even as we've had very serious knockdown, drag-out fights over religious hiring rights, the HHS mandate. The question really is, Pastor Warren, you talked about it, I think, earlier today about co-belligerency and so forth.
Right.
Can you just, is there a way to have the discourse, the debate about religious liberty, religious freedom in America, as heated as that can be at times, with all that's bound up in it, and yet at the same time push the envelope on problem-solving things that all of us just about would say, hey, these are partnerships for the common good?
Well, John, as I mentioned earlier, Americans agree on much of the basics. We just disagree on how to get there. Everybody in America wants their family to be safe. Everybody in America wants their children to have a good education. Everybody in America wants to be healthy. Everybody in America wants a good job. Everybody in America wants to feel that our country is safe from terrorism. There's no disagreement on this. The issue is, how do we get there? And when that comes to disagreement, then I think it's important not to say that somebody I disagree with is not patriotic. I think that, as I said, I believe in, as a pastor, I obviously believe in the good news. I believe Jesus Christ is who he said he was, died on the cross for the redemption of our sins, rose again, but I also believe in the common good. And in America, I believe in pluralism. I do not believe in relativism, or the dictatorship of relativism, as Pope Benedict has talked about. Relativism basically says all ideas are equally valid. That's nonsense. It's just nonsense. To say the moon is made of cheese or the moon is made of rock are not equally valid ideas. Some things are true and some things are not true. But we do live in a pluralistic world, becoming more and more pluralistic, which means, to quote that great theologian Rodney King, can't we all just get along? And what I believe is, I deeply, and I have 2-3 things that I intend to do about this, believe in preserving freedom of religion. I'm not willing to be a flamethrower about it, because I don't think that's going to move me ahead. I know enough about, as a pastor, I could get up every week and yell at people and tell them all the things they're doing wrong. That's not going to change them at all. Actually, nagging doesn't work in church, it doesn't work in the home, and it doesn't work with the government. You have to use other forms to get the kind of change that you want. But the first thing we have to agree on is that freedom matters. And if we can get everybody to agree on that, we don't all agree on our philosophies, but freedom matters. The one thing history teaches us is that freedom is incredibly fragile. It never, ever, ever, ever lasts forever. It just doesn't last forever. And so, as Franklin said, it is the duty of each generation to protect it. We give up We lose our freedom for three reasons. We can lose our freedom out of neglect. We just don't value it. We can lose our freedom out of license, and that is, there's so much anarchy going on, it means nothing anymore. But we can also lose our freedom because we give it up in order to get security because of our fears of something. So we give up freedom for security. And so if we can start at that level and say, look, we don't agree on salvation. I don't agree on salvation with a Muslim guy, but I work with Muslims all the time on issues that we can work together on.
And in your case, on HIV/AIDS, I mean, a wide range of organizations
exactly.
that might take different views than your own on
gays
issues.
would not ever agree with my view on sexuality or my opposition to the redefinition of marriage. But I'm working with gay groups around the world to end AIDS. That's what Schaeffer called co-belligerency. I said this earlier in one of the things that, I don't agree with almost anything that the National Organization of Women teaches. But if the National Organization said, we want to fight pornography and the objectification of a woman's body, I'm in. And I'll work with the National Organization of Women on that issue. And so what I'm concerned about is that we build a broad enough coalition on the religious freedom so that we're not making it's our issue and all the rest of you are out of it. They need to see, as Robbie pointed out, it's benefit to everybody. It's a benefit to everybody to have religious freedom.
And Professor George, same question, but with a little Catholic spin here. I was in a discussion with a group of folks here actually in Washington, D.C., which I come to rarely.
Had enough of it the first time.
Yeah, I told people here, don't worry, I'm not coming back. But in last December, talking about this religious freedom, the HHS mandate, and one of the folks who, took a pretty dim view of some of what was being said in private. You guys talk about a war on religion. It's a funny war on religion when somebody gives you $4 billion, and then you say they're waging a war on religion, which is reference to the federal funding for Catholic charities, Catholic relief services, the expansion in federal funding for myriad Catholic community serving organizations that's gone on at the very time that this HHS mandate issue, the religious hiring rights issue. So same question, is there a way to have the real fight, which needs to be had about religious liberty, and yet at the same time find common ground, common good ways of moving forward to solve certain problems that everybody agrees need to be solved in common? Is there a way to do that, or have we passed that, have we crossed that Rubicon, past that point?
That's a good point.
Well, let me just make sure I get this straight. So they are not waging a war on religion, but we are waging a war on women.
Well, that was the discourse, and but the point was.
Well, the point on that is
when there was an election to win. Yeah. We were waging a war on women. Okay, I think I see how the field of battle in the
key thing is played here. Whoever frames the discussion wins, and you cannot let people frame it as this is a war on women. That's nonsense. There's a much deeper issue than that.
Right.
And if you let people frame it according to their viewpoint, you're going to lose.
Well, John, look, I mean, I want to find things to praise in the current administration, and there are some things. Some of my conservative friends have found things to praise in this administration that I do not praise. The use of drones, the overuse of predator drones, some of the things that we learned about in the white paper that was revealed and so forth. Conservatives are praising the Obama administration. I can't join there. But in Jacques' office, for example, there are some things to praise, and that's what you're talking about. But here I finally found something to disagree with Rick on, because I think we need some flamethrowers. Yeah. Now I hasten to say, I mean this for the camera. I mean this metaphorically. And I think the kinds of flames that need to be thrown are, we need to name reality. My friend Maggie Gallagher is wonderful on this. You got to name reality. Yeah. You got to call something what it is. You don't pretend that it's something other than
I agree with
it
that.
is. Where there are violations of religious freedom, you got to name it by name. You can't tiptoe around it, find polite ways. And where it happens, and the negotiations, because one side has its firmly held view, the other side has its firmly held view, and you can't reach agreement. If our side believes that fundamental religious freedom is being violated. The flame throwing that I have in mind is what we do at the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty. Christina Arriaga is here, our executive director. Sue them. That's the kind of flame throwing we need. Sue them. Don't fool around. Now,
Let me tell you my flame throwing. My flame throwing is civil disobedience. And I would think nothing about civil disobedience if it violated my conscience. And I think that religious liberty is going to be the civil rights movement of the next decade. And I think we could take some lessons from the civil rights movement, is that nonviolent disobedience. When the HHS mandate came out, I did two things. I called Cardinal Dolan and said, I'm in, whatever it takes. I'm in 100% solidarity with you guys. And number two, I tweeted it to about 1 million people. And by the way, if you're not following me on Twitter, you're going to hell. So you gotta follow. And I tweeted and I said, I stand in 100% solidarity with my Catholic brothers and sisters, and I would be willing to go to jail for it. And if it takes a few high-profile pastors, when Martin Luther King went to the Birmingham jail, people sat up and go, what's going on down there? And so that's my version of flame throwing, is not just can we all get along and not. I 100% agree with Robbie. You got to name the issues, but I think what I'm thinking is I'm willing to disobey you.
Yeah, I think that's terribly important. My very dear friend and co-teacher, former colleague, Cornell West at Princeton, he and I disagree about tons and tons of things, although our teaching together is an enormous blessing. He's now moved up to Union Theological Seminary, so we don't get to do it anymore. But despite our many, many disagreements, I have great admiration for him for this very reason. He is willing to go to jail and has gone to jail repeatedly for what he believes. Often the things he's going to jail for are not things I believe. I believe in. But nevertheless, because I want to pay tribute to his willingness to do that, I have told him I'm always available, and this is for real, to bail him out. I'll put up the bail, whether I believe in the...
bail me out?
No, only Cornell.
That's what I figured.
If you teach with me one semester, then you get
I
bailed
can be
out.
bought.
Here's the ask.
John, I think this is deep. We had a deep problem here. I mean, yes, we want to be able to work together. Co-belligerency, absolutely. Yes, I'm with Rick on if the National Organization for Women wants to get together on fighting pornography and the objectification of women, absolutely. I'm in. I feel exactly the same way, despite our other differences. And I realize that they, in good faith, believe what they believe, just as I, in good faith, believe what. It's a tragedy that we're this far apart, that we're so fractured in this country, that the moral consensus is broken down. But still, we can sometimes work at, same with trafficking of women into sexual slavery. This is something that I've been fighting for many years. I know you have as well. And here there are feminist groups with whom I disagree on abortion and other issues, but we're in there fighting together. Although I'm very disappointed sometimes in the feminist groups who are AWOL in that fight, and sometimes even think that the solution is the legalization of prostitution. And I wish they would just talk to some of the women who are the victims, and they'll see that that is not the solution. Anyway, laying that aside, yes, all for co-belligerency. But here's the situation we find ourselves in. So often, our friends on the other side, with their hands on the levers of power, in good faith, in conscience, believe that our view must be marginalized, that our participation must, if at all, is conditioned on our assenting to, or at least not complaining about or going along with, matters that we, in conscience is informed by faith and reason, simply cannot go along with. Georgetown Law School, a former professor at Georgetown Law School, Kai Feldblum, who's now on the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, who's very active in the gay movement and the gay marriage movement, to her credit, said a few years ago that yes, there will be hundreds of points of conflict between gay rights and religious liberty. She agreed with Mark Stern of the American Jewish Committee, who had said there is a train wreck coming on this issue because the conflicts are inevitable. But, she said, I have trouble thinking of any conflicts on which the religious liberty interest should prevail over the sexual interest. Now, the plain fact of the matter, because I believe with Maggie that we need to speak plainly, is Kai's view represents not some idiosyncratic view of Professor Feldblum. It is the dominant view on her side of the street and in the current administration. It just is. And it accounts for a whole lot of things. And let's just take the trafficking issue. Christina can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but my recollection is that one of the matters that we've been concerned about at the Beckett Fund is contracts for the provision of social services to women who were trafficked into sexual slavery being in effect conditioned on being willing to provide or arrange for abortion counseling. We don't do that. Catholic organizations, other Christian organizations do not do that. We cannot do that. So are our contracts to be not renewed despite the excellence of the record of our social service providers in this very difficult, I'll tell you, and Rick knows because he's been in this fight as well. This is a tough area. Fighting the traffickers is a very tough area. And it is so hard. This is not an easy nut to crack. Assisting these women in these very difficult positions is incredibly complex. When you've got an organization, whether it's Catholic or Protestant or Jewish or secularist, whatever it is, that's doing good work, and then you say, well, yeah, but can't renew that contract. They don't do abortion counseling or contraceptives or whatever it is. My goodness, you're disabling an excellent soldier in the battle. And the real women's real lives that are affected by that, and that's what gets me so upset.
No, you're right.
Well, I don't know if, Tom, if our mandate has run out, because we started a little later and we can go a bit later, but I'd love to take a few questions from the audience. I know there's a whole bunch and right here, because I can even see this far.
So if men are gay, they're gay. It's not a choice, it's what they are. And so aren't you a bigot if you don't want them to have marriage just like heterosexuals? What's the Christian response to that?
Well, on marriage, we're not going to get 1 centimeter toward understanding what fairness or equality demands with respect to an institution such as marriage, really any institution, until we decide on what the institution is. We can't decide whether it's unfair to treat some relationships as marital and other relationships as non-marital, since some will certainly be treated as non-marital, others as marital, until we understand what is marriage. And if I can pause for commercial advertisement, with my 2 brilliant young co-authors, Sharif Girgis and Ryan Anderson, I have written a book with a wonderful blurb on the back from Rick Warren called What is Marriage? And it is all explained in the
and it's good.
In the book. And I'll tell you something, it has something to do with children. Maggie says, when a baby is born, it's a pretty good bet that there's going to be a mother somewhere in the vicinity. Mm-hmm. The question is, will there be a father somewhere in the vicinity to help that mother bringing up that child, and to bring up that child in the context of the loving bond and commitment of father and mother? Nature does not provide that. If that's provided, it's provided not by nature, but by culture, where you have the norms and the pressures and the guidance that gives you reliably fathers in the pictures. And when culture provides that, we have a name for that: marriage. We start there, but then we have to add that it's a mistake to imagine that marriage is simply a means to an end where the end is child-rearing. If you take this instrumentalist view of marriage and fail to see marriage as something that is intrinsically and not merely instrumentally good, you're going to make a mistake on the other end. But the answers are all in the book.
That's a pretty deep point that he just sloughed over real quickly. That second point. Don't take just an instrumental view of marriage.
Yeah. One more, and it's going to be a doozy, I could tell. Sir.
Yes, you touched on some aspects. Sure. I'm not afraid to throw some flames or to name the problem, and it seems to me the problem is virulent secular humanism that will brook no debate of its own internal views. It also seems to me we're losing that debate, and it seems to me we're losing that debate because we woke up one day and found that our institutions had been taken over by secular humanism. So as a practical matter, How do we regain our ground? What is the playbook, if you will, to defend our religious freedom? And what must we be willing to do in order to accomplish that?
What a wonderful closing question. I couldn't have said, in fact, you said it way better than I was going to say it. Pastor Warren and then Robbie, and we will close on that.
Well, I've been doing a lot of thinking about that. I'll tell you a couple things I'm planning on doing. For 32 years, I have said no to doing a radio program because I didn't want to be a celebrity. I think always being in the spotlight blinds you. I just wanted to pastor a local church. But when that book came out, it kind of blew my cover. And I had more visibility. And I have made the decision in April, Lord willing, I can find the funding on it. I'm going to go on national radio on a daily basis because I believe somebody's got to speak up about this. And I intend to make this to be one of my theme issues. I'm going to start a daily radio program called Daily Hope. And you guys are the first to really know this. I didn't even tell anybody about it till today, earlier today. And I prayed about it for a long time because I really didn't want to do it. But there are two things that really bother me about I love our country. And there are two things that bother me. One is there's a real sense of discouragement in our nation right now. And I could give you a dozen reasons for it. There are lots of reasons. I mean, we're in the longest waiting for recovery in the history of America right now. We're in year 5, okay? I still have 10% of my church out of work. Ooh. And I'm in a white-collar Orange County. Okay, now, we're not white, but we're white-collar. When I started Saddleback Church, we were a lily-white suburban church. We now speak 67 languages. Wow. We call ourselves an all-nation congregation. Wow. You look at it, Saddleback, it's United Nations on the weekend. So we speak 67 languages in my church. So there's a sense of discouragement, and part of it comes from the economy, part of it comes from things like Newtown and natural disasters that we've had, part of it comes from the coarsening of our culture, part of it comes from we have become an incredibly rude society because of the internet. People are not afraid to say the most vile things behind the safety of a screen that they'd never tell you in public. There are so many different issues, but we are in a discouragement, and I feel like the nation needs some hope. That's another thing I'm going to do too. Thanks, Tom. I decided next, you might want to write this date down, and I would love to have you come, and if you want to be a sponsor, I'd love to get as many organizations co-sponsoring. I'm going to chair and host the first National Congress on Religious Liberty at Saddleback. And it's going to be a all-day Thursday, all-day Friday, all-day Friday, all-day Thursday, Friday, and Saturday morning. I am planning to bring in about 50 speakers, a broad spectrum of different leaders. I actually chose that date because Cardinal Dolan told me he'd co-host it with me.
Good.
And Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of that week is the Conference of Bishops, and they're coming to San Diego, which is an hour away. It's in June. June 13, 15. So I'm going to invite all the bishops to come up after the conference is over to come on up. It's only an hour away.
Wow.
And
sounds like a blast.
It's going to be a blast. And we will have plenary speakers, and then we're going to have workshops dealing with smaller niche issues like zoning laws for home Bible studies, and all of those little different things, a million different ways that our religious freedoms are being eaten away. And I honestly, I need financial people, and I need sponsors, and I need speakers, and I'm going to do it as an invitation only. I obviously would love to invite all of you, because you obviously are here, you care about that, but I'm going to invite institutional leaders. The leaders of colleges and universities and schools, the leaders of hospitals, the leaders of large churches, the leaders of NGOs, the people who make it. So it's not just going to be open to the public, but we will bring in the media. And the issue is, I intend to make a splash on this. We have done a number of these civil forums. Most of you saw the one I did with Obama and McCain. And on that one, we certified 502 media. Not only in America, but all around the world, they were coming in for that. And so I intend to use that as to raise the issue. That's just two ways I'm trying to do it. A radio program and a civil forum.
Holy cow. Professor George.
John, you will recall that Blessed Pope John Paul II, John Paul the Great, described himself as a witness to hope.
Yeah.
That was the title that George Weigel used for his great biography of the Pope. And I love, Rick, the title you've given to your radio show, Daily Hope, because you have been and are, like John Paul II, a witness to hope. And what a great thing for a Christian leader to be a witness to hope. And really, that is the answer to your question. We have to be witnesses to hope. Like John, I occupy a little part of the universe in which the established religion is secular liberalism or secular humanism, whatever you want to call it. You know, I am, as the cover story of the Princeton Alumni Weekly once put it, the heretic in the temple. John's a heretic in the temple, too, but he had abandoned me by the time that came out, so I was the sole lonely heretic in the temple. But I want to say that I have a lot of respect for my secular liberal or secular humanist friends. I dramatically, profoundly disagree with them, top to bottom. But they've got a worldview, and they believe in it, and they are prepared to defend it, with arguments. Like anybody who gets power in institutions, especially overwhelming and dominant power in institutions, they're not so happy sometimes to share it or to tolerate much dissent. But what worldview in the history of religious or otherwise, in the history of humanity, has a spotless record when it comes to tolerating dissenters? So my church certainly doesn't. So I do have respect. I want to start by saying that. They are a formidable foe, I do not see any way to effectively push back against the efforts to spread that pseudo-gospel through the culture using both private and public institutions as the media of transmission of values in that project. I don't see any way to fight back without uniting religious believers across the lines of historical, theological, religious division in common witness to our common values. Amen. Witness to hope. When Rick talked about working with our Muslim friends, I'm absolutely for it. Hamza Yusuf and I share an enormous amount of moral conviction. If you look at secular liberalism on the one side and Catholicism and Islam as Hamza practices it on the other side, it's hard to distinguish the Muslims and the Catholics. Yeah. It's easy to distinguish either one from the secular liberals or secular humanists. So Hamza and I are working together. It's easy to work with Rick. Our Orthodox Jewish friends need to be in the conversation as well. I, as a Catholic, have benefited enormously from working with our LDS friends. It's the Mormon Church, small percentage of our population, people of enormous conviction and willing to stand up and take risks and suffer consequences. What they did in the marriage fight was heroic. We need to be standing together across these lines. We, on the Christian side of things, we of course try to do this in the Manhattan Declaration. Right. And anyone who hasn't read the Manhattan Declaration and considered signing it should go sign it. Should get online, manhattandeclaration.org, and look at there. That was a case of evangelicals, Catholics, and Eastern Orthodox Christians uniting in a set of common commitments to the sanctity of life in all stages and conditions, the dignity of marriage as the conjugal union of husband and wife, and religious liberty and the rights of conscience. But the larger project needs to be even more comprehensive, bringing in anybody who's willing to come. I think this idea of and some of my fellow conservatives, and I regard myself as I'm an ex-liberal, liberal with a teenage daughter. I regard myself as a conservative, but it to me is crazy for my fellow conservatives to push our Muslim friends into the arms of the left. I don't get that. I honestly don't get that. These are good, honorable, decent people. To treat them all as if they're terrorists is insane. And many of their values are our values. And if they're prepared to work with us, we should be prepared to work with them. And on terms of equality, I want people of all different faiths, mine and other faiths, not only in the cause, but in leadership positions in the cause. So our movement cannot be just the evangelicals or the Christian right, or just the Catholics. We have to unite across those historic divisions in order to have any hope of building a world in which the values that really are foundational to any decent civilization are secure for our children and our grandchildren.
Before asking Tom to bring us to a long overdue, you might say, end, but this has been spectacular and heartening and thoughtful. And let me just close. Speaking of hope, you know, there is a way. Religious liberty does belong. Religious freedom, many definitions, multiple and competing ones, but it belongs to everyone. It belongs to Quakers, and it belongs to Catholics, it belongs to Muslims, it belongs to Methodists, it belongs to Jews, Jehovah's Witnesses, it belongs to atheists, it belongs to agnostics. And when things happen in the world, like happened in post-Katrina New Orleans, where I've been down there a whole lot since that, it was amazing to see how people came, what Millard Fuller used to call the theology of the hammer, brought people together who normally wouldn't be working side by side or having these debates and discussions side by side. And it does make a difference. The reference point makes a difference. When you know somebody and you care for somebody, you're more likely to give them that slight benefit of the doubt. So it's an important discourse and discussion. And to hear Pastor Warren that I'm going to have something to listen to on the radio now, because other than bluegrass, when I'm waiting for Professor George to his latest album to come aboard, you didn't know about that. That's not a book out yet, but coming soon to
you outed me.
But thank you so much, and Tom, if you would bring us to a close.
I will do so. What a fantastic evening it's been. We try to make our Religious Freedom Project events on time, and tonight we went a little bit over, but to me it really was worth it. Join me in thanking these three gentlemen for a wonderful and entertaining and informative evening.
Great job.